All right. We will begin landing the plane now. You can put your tray tables in their upright position. We're going to end with talking about how do we cultivate conversations about technology. And this is geared generally towards parents, but I think it's open to anybody, especially grandparents, but also students. I think there are ways for you to kind of create more opportunities for these conversations in your interactions. The first thing, particularly for parents, is to reward good judgment in analog situations that reinforce how their decisions apply to the digital situation. What I mean by that is an example. Several months ago, my daughter had gone into our office and was on the computer, and she had been wanting for a long time a cat, and I am not what you would refer to as a cat person, and so I've just been like, we don't even have to talk about it, because now. But she still dreams, and so she had in our cart, I think, 37 cat items. It was a moment of clarity that said, Jason, it's okay. You can always empty the cart, which we did immediately. But I told her, what is the rule when it comes to the computer? She said, well, I'm supposed to ask you or mommy. That's right. Did you ask me or mommy? No, I didn't. But I just love cats. It's well documented, sweetheart. I understand that. But I also want to tell you something. What you did here is not evil, and I'm not mad at you. But I want you to understand, this is an example of why it will probably be a long time before we give you and empower you with your own device. Our simple rule was to not be on the computer without permission. And you weren't able to exercise good judgment because your desire to look up cat things was greater than your desire to do what we asked you to do. So right now, this is not a big deal. I don't want to make it a bigger deal than it is. But I want you to understand that one day, you're going to be given almost unlimited power. And when you do that, and when I willfully give you something that gives you that access, I'm saying I trust you to make good decisions, and good decisions are doing the right thing even when you desire to do something else. And you didn't do that here. So I'm trying to teach you. When you show us a pattern of wise behavior, and I get it, you're 9 years old. This is a ridiculous expectation to have, but you're going to hear it a lot over the next few years. My hope, one, I don't trust that that's a one and done situation. But my hope is that in that moment, we at least planted a seed and that we have the conviction and the wisdom to be consistent enough to where all along the way when these opportunities come up, we draw her back to our logic. I think sometimes parents make two mistakes. One, they don't express any expectation before there's a violation of that expectation. Communication is really important. And two, I think a lot of parents, especially my age, have gone into parenting their children based solely off of our experience with social media and technology. And I think that's a mistake because just in the last 10 to 15 years, social media has changed so much. If I parent my kids based off of my experience in 2004 or 5 when Facebook came out, well then I'm missing a lot between now and then. So I think, we have to be learned, we have to be educated in what's out there and how it works and how it operates, but then we have to be able to, again, here's that word, calibrate. We have to translate how that impacts them now, in the here and now, when they're younger. I'm not going to let you get behind the wheel of a car by yourself before I've taught you how to exercise good judgment. I will also acknowledge that that's only half the battle because there's another lane of traffic coming this way and I have zero control over them. It's not any different online. So I think when they exercise good judgment and they do something that's good, I'm really good at pointing out when they have the infraction, but I also want to be really good at pointing out when they do good, when they make a good, wise judgment. That's great. That's what we want to continue to see more of. And as they do that, then I have to be willing to give incremental freedom to them to kind of reinforce that. A few ways to approach permanency, the idea of what's out there is out there forever. The first is very simple. I usually have a couple of kids that'll come up, and I try to get like a 7th grade girl and like a senior guy, maybe like a football player. Really like the contrast there. And I give each of them a bottle of toothpaste or a bottle of like ketchup and mustard. And we did this in Mobile a few months back, and this little girl, man, she was tenacious. She squeezed as hard as she could, and of course this was a big burly guy. He squeezed all he could. Gave him 10 seconds to squirt out as much as they could on a paper plate. We stopped. We kind of voted who won. Then I gave him 10 more seconds to see who could get as much of that back in the tube as possible. And so to watch this dude like sweat as the girl somehow found a way to get some of it actually back into the squirt bottle there, it was pretty funny. But afterwards, we talked about the reality of what it illustrates. We talked about gossip and words. If you say something that's out there, you can't take it back. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's the biggest lie, great rhyme scheme, but biggest lie ever told. Now it's even more so. Just because you post it and you think it disappears, if you think it's gone, you're just wrong. There's a server out there somewhere that's going to hang on to that until it's advantageous for someone else to release it. How many politicians, how many entertainers, how many leaders do we have to see that said something or did something back in whatever decade that now is put back out there for the world to see? So this idea of permanency, what you say and what you do online, what you post, what you send to your friends, it's out there forever. Even if you delete it, all it takes is one screenshot. Even if it disappears, all it takes is one screenshot, and then it goes everywhere. The second part, emphasize the biblical teaching of Ephesians 4:29. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouth, but only such as is good for building up as it fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. What's something worth sharing again and seeing pop up in your memories 5 and 10 years down the road? That's what you post. That's what makes for a reasonable post to share. Something that in 10 years down the road, you're not ashamed to see it. I've had a bunch that have shown up from my early Facebook years that I haven't thought twice since I put it out there. And not necessarily evil stuff, but just really kind of dumb, like freshman in college kind of stuff. Again, all due respect, any freshmen in the room. But you're going to regret some of the stuff you say, right? Make sure that there's also not evil intent behind it. Make sure that no corrupting talk comes out of our mouths, especially every 4 years. What we say about the other people that live in our country, wherever you are on that spectrum, you live in one place, and that is in Christ. And that is how we filter what we say. There's a couple, Sarah Michelle Gellar and Freddie Prinze Jr., that were like the prom king and queen of the late 90s, early 2000s. Every guy wanted to be Freddie, and every guy also wanted to date Sarah Michelle Gellar. And they actually got together. They have a couple of kids. They were, I think, married for a little bit. They have their one child that Sarah Michelle Gellar was interviewed about. And again, they made their living by being movie stars, very prominent in the media and in society. And Sarah's response to giving her kids social media was, I told my child that me giving them access to social media at their age, I think they were like 5 or 6, is a lot like me saying, yes, you can get a Paw Patrol face tattoo. Because when you're 5, well, probably more when you're 2 and 3, a Paw Patrol face tattoo sounds like a great idea. Paw Patrol anything, obviously, sounds great, as my 2-year-old would attest. But when you're 7, 8, 9 years old, when you're rolling up into middle school with Chases on the case on your face, it's not going to hit the same. Right? There will be a hit involved, but it's not what you're looking for. It's not going to age well. And so her point is, why in the world, when I know you're going to do things that you're going to regret, and at a scale that I can't control, why would I empower you to do so? And I thought that was beautiful. What a way to say that, on a way that hopefully they get it. And if they don't, you just got to keep saying it, keep trying to find other ways to say it. That's a big part of parenting, right? Saying the same thing 100 different ways, or 100 ways the same way, and then the 101st time, somebody else says it, and they're like, oh, that makes sense. I've been telling you that the whole time. But that's why it takes all of us. That's why if you're a person here and you don't have children, the people that have children need your influence. Because if you say it and you say it a different way, or if you say it the exact same way, there's a good chance it's going to stick differently. We always had great parent participation on retreats, but they always got the same speech at our chaperone meeting before we left. There's a really good chance, parents, that your kids on this retreat don't want to talk to you. That is okay. I know it hurts and it's difficult, but there's also an equally good chance that there's someone else's kids here that desperately need to talk to you. You're not here to drive a bus. We could charter a bus if we needed to. You're here to be a present, to have presence in the life of these children, to be present with them spiritually, to be present with them emotionally, to be present with them relationally. And that is still the case. So this is, again, not exclusively for parents. This is for the whole church. We're all in this together. I recommend the same approach that we take to driver's license. Like if you get a driver's license, you have to study a manual. You have to have chaperone time behind the wheel, right? You have incremental freedom. As you show competence, then you get freedom. We currently have the law, at least in Alabama, of the age of 16 is the earliest you can get a full driver's license. And even then, there's some restrictions on, I think, the first 6 months, you still have like a curfew and things like that. Well, I kind of think that we should probably look at maybe pushing that back after all the evidence we looked at for how teens are getting older later in life. But not just that, if my kid turns 16 and I don't think they're ready to get behind the wheel of a car by themselves, I'm not going to give them the keys. What I will do is continue to explain to them that I need to see incremental maturity as well. Your maturity directly impacts your liberty as long as you're in my house. That's the way we are going to parent, is we are going to reward you when you are mature, but we are going to pull back and we're going to put in our guardrails in hopes that you learn how to drive on the road without going all the way off the cliff by yourself, right? So I think that same approach. I would have them read some books. This is, again, from the Surgeon General warning. We looked at this earlier. Social media's use is compromising their sleep, valuable in-person time with family and friends. We're in the midst of this health crisis. So why would I just let them go on about their day knowing that they may not be where they need to be? When it comes to social media, I'm going to find ways to incorporate some limitations. I'm going to have them, these are 4 books. There are a lot of them out there. In fact, Joe Wells just came out with a book. This is a good one. Shout out. So I need to update this one, I guess, with that as well. But Screens and Teens is one that I found that's very helpful. Raising Humans in a Digital World. I would read that one as a parent, and then I would pull some of those concepts to create a conversation. Analog Christian came out, actually Analog Church came out in like February of 2020, and nobody heard about it for about 6 months. And then all of a sudden, when we're all at home looking for books to read, it became very popular, and then J. Kim came out with Analog Christian as the companion. I love this book because it talks about contentment, cultivating contentment, resilience, and wisdom in the digital age. Well, those are 3 great topics to talk about with your kid, with your teenager, or even with their friends. How does technology in your life, how has it been cultivating content? Do you feel yourself more content or less content? Are you anxious? This is a great resource. And then Glow Kids is Dr. Nicholas Cardaris. He's got a lot of TED Talks and YouTube videos as well. A great resource. Have your kids read some of these books. Required reading. Look, you want a device? I want you to read about this, and then I want us to talk about it. What do you think about the stats that are coming out? If you're a teenager or a student here and you're wondering, why do we have a day devoted to technology? Why are my parents making such a big deal out of this? It's because we're starting to read. We're starting to get the data that says you guys are not happy, that you're struggling in a lot of ways, and we feel very responsible for that because we are in a lot of ways. So that's why we're doing this, and that's why we talk about these things. These are 4 places that I think are good talking points. When it comes to screen time, you probably have somewhere on your phone, on the iPhone, it's under settings, and then go down to screen time. It gives you your average screen time. A couple of weeks ago, for 2 weeks in a row, I averaged over 6 hours. That was alarming to me. I've cut it down to 4 this week. Really excited about that. Heading for 3 is the hope. Now, some of that is like GPS and all that kind of stuff, but most of that was, for me, it was Instagram, Facebook, and Bleacher Report. I like to read about sports, right? And most of my algorithms reflect those kinds of things. Even if I'm not looking at bad things, I'm giving 6 hours of my day to a screen, to a device. I sleep usually about half of that. So, okay, we'll say 10 hours. 10 hours of my day. So I've got 14 hours left. When my kids are at school for 7, you start whittling it down and you're like, man, if I'm getting anywhere from 3 to 4 hours, maybe 5 or 6 hours with my kids a day, is that enough? Can I get everything into their hearts and into their minds, into their ears in the amount of time I have with them? No, it is not. So if I'm at bedtime and daddy's doing this, daddy's wrong. And if the kids start acting up, it's not their fault they're acting up. It's because they don't have their father's attention. So screen time is a big deal. This is the best image I've seen to talk about screen time with anyone. This came from a TED Talk that I found online, and I'll have a link here later for you to see some of those YouTube videos as well. Each of these rows of circles represents 3 years of life. And this is what it looks like for an 18-year-old if you average, I think, 90 years, assuming a 90-year life expectancy. So that's the rest of your life at the age of 18. The first part here in the purple is 288 months that you're going to spend sleeping. For some of us, that may be more. Others, that may be less. Work and school, on average, about 126 months of your life. That's the green. And then you get driving, which is about 18 months. Cooking and eating, 36 months. Chores and errands, 36 months. Bathroom hygiene, around 27 months. Generally speaking, this is kind of how it's all going to fall out. So you've got about 334 months of free time to figure out what to do with. And this was, I believe this video is in 2021 or 2022. Based off of the average screen time then, which was closer to about 6 hours. Today, the most recent studies are showing closer to about 9 hours, which is more than a full-time job. This is what it looks like. The amount of time, those black dots, the amount of time you will spend looking at your device. Now, my assumption is that we're all looking at our Bible app during that time. Probably not. And again, you may not be looking at terrible things, but we're looking at a device that listens to what we say, keeps a record of what we look at and how long we look at it, keeps a record of what we like, what we don't like, what we share, what we don't share, what we search for, what we listen to, what we watch, and we're giving it our undivided attention. That is something worth thinking about. And whatever age you are, when you look at this chart, it should be eye-opening. We can change that. There's no reason why we can't. But it takes an incredible amount of discipline with an equal amount of accountability and a double amount of encouragement from other people and from our patterns in life to make this happen. To some degree, the sky is falling and the alarm should be sounding. To the other degree, there's hope. There's always hope. So this is something we can use to teach our children. James 4:14 says that, yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. I learned this lesson in a very intimate way New Year's Eve a year ago. We go to my mom and dad's every other Sunday and my wife's parents every other Sunday for lunch after worship. And so this particular 2 New Year's Eves ago, we were going to my parents' house and I was walking up and my brother came to the door. My brother is a very emotionally steady kind of person, not real emotional. He came to the door and he wasn't emotional, but he just had this look that I don't really care to ever see again on his face. And he said, hey, Aunt Lori died. Okay, Aunt Lori is the youngest sister of my mom's siblings. There's 4 of them. My mom's the second oldest. Lori was her best friend, her closest sibling, and basically her baby. She essentially raised her growing up. They're very, very close. I said, oh, so like a car accident? Like that, I guess that would make some sense. He's like, no, we don't really know. Okay, I don't get that. We went through lunch and it was everything you imagined it would be. We eventually found out that she had some underlying health conditions that we didn't really know the extent of them. She and her husband have a farm in North Carolina and a home in Georgia. She was driving from the home in Georgia to the farm, and she didn't feel great. And of course, my uncle kicks himself for not making sure she went to the hospital. If she had had a blood transfusion, she would have been fine. We came to find out later. But she basically got home to the farm, laid down on the couch, and she just never woke up. There was fluid and buildup of pressure on her heart to the point where it just stopped beating. It still doesn't really make sense to me, to be quite honest with you. She was the youngest. She was, I would assume, the most healthy. Our life is but a vapor. We don't know. And so that's why the stakes are really high for the things that we post and the way we use our time, the way we steward our words and our influence. We can't waste it on immature things. We have an appointed time here on this earth, and it's according to God's plan, not ours. He has knowledge, we do not. That's why we don't walk by sight, we walk by faith. We ascribe value based off of spiritual value, not physical convenience. I think that's something we have to get better at teaching the next generation. Ultimately, the best question you can ask yourself and your kids is, what is your purpose for technology? It's not an easy question to answer. How does your app or your device, how does your home, the culture of your home, how does it cultivate fruit of the Spirit? How are you becoming more loving and more like Christ as a result of the things in your life? Again, why are we talking about technology? Because it amplifies what's in our hearts. Our brains are connected to our hearts. We have to get better at what we look at and what we think about. One thing, we're getting real close. I said land the plane, and here we are still in the air. Brain plasticity is a really good place to begin from either a research standpoint, if you don't understand it, or from a talking standpoint. I think it's really good to be honest with our kids. That's what my wife has really ingrained in our parenting, and it's the right thing. Teach them that your brain is trainable. You learn things, right? It's when the brain is rewired to function in some way that differs from how it previously functioned. It learns something, good or bad. Prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain in the very front, you guys know when it typically matures and gets to its age? Mid-20s, which is why we do a lot of really dumb things before we get to our mid-20s. It's responsible for planning, for decision-making, working memory, personality expression, moderating social behavior, controlling aspects of speech and language. So if you're still in your early 20s, clock's ticking, man. No more excuses after you turn 25. That part doesn't develop. So we're physically incapable sometimes of making good decisions fully because we can't fully rationalize. That's why God talks over and over again about having wise counsel in your life at all times. If you think about how to teach this to your kids, think about walking through the forest and take them through the woods. If you go through the woods the first time, it looks like that. Doesn't look like anybody has been there. But if you walk that same path day after day after day after day after day, eventually you will see a well-worn path that begins to take shape. When you watch content that has violence, language, and sexual content in it over and over and over and over and over again, then your brain then begins to develop a path, much like the path in the woods, that becomes more clearly defined and it becomes wider so that everything you see and do and say is now filtered through that same filter. I was driving to campus one day in college. Somebody cut me off. I slammed on the brakes. Something came out of my mouth that I don't usually say. Like, where in the world did that come from? And then I looked at my iPod, which is a device we used to use that we listened to music. I looked at the movies that I had been watching. I looked all around and realized, oh, I didn't put it in there, but I did. It's really how it works, right? So the more we think about these things, the more we hear about these things, the more we think like those things. So if you keep putting in worldly thoughts and worldly philosophies, you're going to be thinking like the world. We got to get better at how we teach it. We talked about oxytocin, vasopressin, and the tape. I think that's a better analogy than the rose, and the fact that God basically can repair that piece of tape. He can make it to where it bonds properly again. That's the way it's designed. I think that's much, much better. Just stay away from all like floral analogies in general. I think it's probably a good way to go about it. Again, this is a list of books from Amazon. I'll get this to Matt, and then this is a QR code for a YouTube playlist with a lot of different TED Talks and Google Talks and other interviews that I found very helpful about all of the things we've talked about this week. I'll give you my disclaimer on that. If I recommend the burger at a restaurant, I'm not necessarily recommending everything on the menu or everything on the walls in the restaurant. I'm recommending the burger. These videos in particular most of them are not spiritual in nature. They're scientific and cultural in nature. So there may be some things that they talk about that are not necessarily the best. Certainly wouldn't show them in a worship setting. However, I have found all of them to be very beneficial in better understanding ourselves and the world in which we live. So I would give that recommendation to both the books and to the videos. If there is something that has been especially beneficial, I'd love to hear that from you, feedback. I want this to be helpful, and I hope that it has been. It's been deeply impactful to my life. Going down this road was not something I intended to do. It started with a class assignment and has kind of devolved into like, oh, wait a minute, there's a lot here that we need to be talking about. The biggest thing that I would encourage you to do is to do just that, to have conversations. Have someone in your home or take someone to lunch or go to lunch with someone that you've never gone to lunch with before or someone that you kind of know peripheral and bring them into the fold. And those that you have really good relationships with, how spiritual are your conversations? That's how we address all of this. I think it starts with relationship and generally ends with relationship as well. Our relationship to Christ and our relationship to each other. Before we close with prayer, any questions or comments? I know it's been a lot, drinking from a fire hydrant. Thank you guys for sticking around. Anything to mention right at the end? No, dude, you said land the plane, so go for it. Let's do it. Father in heaven, thank you again for the opportunity to gather today, to glean from your scriptures, from the words that you've given to us, to give us insight into you, who you are, and the life that you have planned for us to live. Help us in this age of abundance to use discernment, to practice wisdom in choosing how and when and where to use technology. Help us to use the tools you've given us today to amplify the gospel, and to take it to places that maybe could not have heard it before, but but also help us to be wise and discerning, to protect ourselves spiritually from the great temptations and the great ways that it can be used to manipulate us from the inside out. Father, we thank you again for Jesus. We thank you for your church. It's through Christ's name we pray. Amen.